Okay, so are you ready to take a deep dive into Scream 1996?
Definitely. Scream is such a classic.
It really is. We've got all these excerpts here, just looking into how much of an impact it had
Mm.
and all the key elements that made it so great in its lasting legacy. We're talking about a movie that manages to give you those like slasher thrills while also like winking at the audience. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
right, right. Like it knows it's a horror movie.
Exactly. It's terrifying and hilarious all at the same time.
Mm.
And it seriously, like, changed how people made horror movies after it came out.
I think what's so interesting about Scream is that it kind of plays with what we all expect from a horror movie, all those tropes we're used to, and then it flips them on their head. It was like nothing we'd seen before,
Yeah.
especially back then.
Totally. Okay, so, like, picture this. You've got Woodsboro, right?
Okay.
This seemingly, like, perfect little town.
Right.
But then suddenly, it becomes this, like, breeding ground for terror when Ghostface, the masked killer, shows up. And guess who becomes, like, his main target?
Let me guess. Sidney Prescott.
Sidney Prescott. Exactly.
Of course.
But what makes it even creepier is that she's dealing with all this past trauma.
Right. It's like all her personal baggage is coming back to haunt her in this really public and horrifying way.
Ugh, so scary. It adds this whole other layer to the story.
Definitely.
And the thing about Sydney is that she's not just some helpless victim.
Totally.
Like, she's smart, resourceful, and completely breaks the mold of what we typically see in horror movies, especially back in the 90s with the whole final girl thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
She's not just running and screaming, she's fighting back.
Yeah.
It's really refreshing.
She's a total badass.
Right.
Her strength is so inspiring. I think that's why people connect with her so much.
For sure.
But then, of course, we have Ghostface,
Right.
this mysterious figure who's like taunting his victims with all this horror movie trivia.
Mm-hmm.
This is where that whole meta element comes in, right?
Exactly.
He's not just some random killer. He's like a horror expert who's playing this deadly game.
Right. The movie's always blurring the lines between what's real and what's just a movie.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's Randy Meeks.
Oh, I love Rain.
He's like the resident horror movie expert, right?
Yes.
And he lays out these rules for how to survive a horror movie.
No sex, no drugs, and never say, I'll be right back.
Exactly. And of course, what do the characters do?
They break all the rules.
They break all the rules. It's like they're asking to be killed.
It's such a classic horror movie trope, and Scream knows it's playing with it.
Right.
It's constantly winking at the audience like, we know you know what's coming, but watch this.
Totally. And I think one of the best examples of that is the opening scene with Drew Barrymore.
Oh, man, that opening scene.
Right. Everyone thought she was going to be the main character, because she was such a big star back then.
Right.
But then,
That phone call, though, so creepy. So creepy. The tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife, and the way it ends is just shocking. It sets the tone for the whole movie.
totally. And you've got to give Wes Craven credit. His direction is masterful in that scene.
Oh, absolutely.
Like the way he uses those tight close-ups so you feel like you're right there with Casey, feeling her fear.
Oh, my God, yeah.
And the lighting is so dark and shadowy, you can never really get a good look at Ghostface.
Right.
And then those quick cuts, just when you think you know what's going to happen, it cuts to something else.
Mm-hmm.
It's so effective at building this sense of panic and confusion.
And don't forget about the phones.
Ugh, those phones.
They're constantly ringing. It's like this auditory assault that just adds to the whole paranoia of the movie.
It's brilliant.
And speaking of twists, can we talk about the ending?
Oh, man.
That reveal. Two killers, Billy and Stu.
I know.
It's like, what?
Such a good twist. You're like, wait, I thought I had it all figured out, and then bam.
It makes you question everything you thought you knew. Totally. And thinking about it now, that whole double killer twist, I think it reflected this growing sense of anxiety people had back then about who they could trust, especially within their own social circles.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like the 90s were full of all these media scandals and this feeling that things weren't always what they seemed.
Right.
And Scream taps into that feeling in a way that makes it more than just a slasher flick.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. That's such a good point. It's like Scream is commenting on our fascination with horror movies, how the media influences us, and even like these bigger societal trends.
Exactly.
That's so cool. And you can't deny the impact Scream had, right? Like,
Yeah.
it basically revived the slasher genre.
Definitely. It breathed new life into a genre that was kind of stale at that point.
Yeah. And so many horror movies after Scream tried to copy its style.
For sure. And the ghost face mask, instantly iconic.
Oh, yeah.
You see it everywhere, even today.
It's true. And the franchise is still going strong, still exploring these same themes, even in the newest movies.
It's pretty impressive how relevant Scream remains, even after all these years.
It really is.
Yeah.
So if we had to, like, sum it all up, what's the biggest takeaway from Scream?
I think Scream is this perfect blend of horror and humor.
Okay.
It's a movie that loves the horror genre but isn't afraid to make fun of it at the same time. It's
Yeah.
scary, it's funny, and it makes you think.
I love that. It's the whole package.
Yeah.
Now, here's something to think about. Scream totally picks apart all those classic horror tropes, right?
Yeah.
What other genres do you think could use a little bit of that self-aware commentary?
That's a good question.
I don't know. Something to ponder. And honestly, if you haven't seen Scream in a while, or even if you have, I highly recommend rewatching it with all this in mind.
Yeah.
I guarantee you'll see it in a whole new light.
Agreed.